monitors now? Okay, all right. That's the thing, let's see. Do they work? No? Oh, no, there's us. There we go. Oh, excellent. All right. Welcome. Ooh, this is exciting. I was just saying I wasn't nervous, but now that we're in a cloister, I'm a little nervous. Okay, so welcome to Futureproofing, your newsroom for the metaverse. We are going to talk a little bit today about what we've learned from many years in immersive storytelling, experimentation, and today we'll discuss both failed experimentations as well as successful experiments in virtual and augmented reality and what we can learn for the future. My name's Lakshmi Sarah, and I wrote a book called Crafting Stories for Virtual Reality, which is based on a series of over 30 case studies on immersive storytelling projects. And I also teach at UC Berkeley. I'm from California, and I also work with KQED News, which is an NPR affiliate in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'll be moderating the panel, and as we go along, there won't be a formal time for question and answer, but if you want to use the hashtag Futureproofing on Twitter, I'll be monitoring the hashtag, and hopefully if you have any questions, I'll pose them to our panelists and we can answer them as we go along. So that's hashtag Futureproofing. So we'll start with a few introductions, and then we'll continue on with our panel. So, Thomas.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Sema. As you can hear from my accent, I am French. I spent about 5 years working on 360 video for Euronews, a pan-European multilingual news media that's based in Lyon, France, so technically not too far away from here. We've produced over 200 360 video and VR experience, and I've also been a fellow at the University of Missouri at the journalism school there, working on the audience reception of immersive content. Right now at Euronews, I'm a project and development manager. I'm also on the board of a European Youth Press Association, which I have to mention because I think there's some people here in the room, and I hold a master's degree from the Erasmus Mundus journalism program, and I hope there's some people from this program in the room. Off to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Laura Hertzfald, and I have been working in the immersive space for the last 5 or 6 years now. My entire career has really been about bringing digital innovation into newsrooms. I was on the first news team at Yahoo back in the early 2000s and have kind of just continued in the digital space since then. I was a 2019 fellow, JSK fellow at Stanford, where I worked on the intersection of art, immersive storytelling, and journalism, and was really able to spend time with artists talking to them about their creative process and thinking about how we map that to journalism and specifically to immersive storytelling. Before that, I ran a program called Journalism 360, which is how I met everyone on this panel, I think, which was really, really a great project from Google News Lab, the Online News Association, and the Knight Foundation, where we really built a community of immersive storytellers at the very beginning of where this type of content was happening. And so since then, really being able to bring that community into everything that I've done. And the last 3 years, I was back at Yahoo running a program called the XR Partner Program, where we worked with news organizations like the LA Times and USA Today to build stories mostly in augmented reality, and we'll talk about a few of those soon. And I also mentor artists with the New Ink Fellowship at the New Museum in New York, and I'm based in Los Angeles. So.
Hello, I'm Zilla Watson. I was a BBC TV and radio journalist focused on long-form current affairs for many years. And then to get a taste of the future, I moved over to R&D as an editorial lead looking at new forms of content, data-led content, but also the very early days of virtual reality. And I went on to do a report for the Reuters Journalism Institute at Oxford, looking at how different news organizations back in 2017 were approaching the new and exciting world of VR, raised various questions about audience distribution models and business models, but then went on using some of that information and various experiments that had gone on within the BBC to run the BBC's VR Hub, which was a VR studio. And I'm going to use that as a little case study to start. Shall I take the clicker? Because it's a really good example of how to run a digital innovation project, whether that's VR or not, and very much a sort of stepping stone to preparedness for the metaverse. So although we were making really beautiful content, it was quite strategic. Our purpose was to find out what sort of content would resonate with audiences and to use that to build and understand the partnerships we'd need to develop VR, and also to make sure we attracted the best talent for the BBC. So it was really thought out strategically. So content for a purpose, and the content was to understand the business, distribution models, and the audience needs. And it was also, in a big news organisation like the BBC, when something new and exciting comes along, there's a tendency for everyone to want to have a go. And we knew with VR that was a little crazy with the number of headsets that were actually available for every programme to be making their own VR experience. So it was actually strategically as well to slightly limit and contain and work on a few big things rather than giving everyone a go. So we did work out lots of great stuff about how to make good VR content, spatial storytelling that really used the space so you could understand where you were, obviously bringing in a sense of presence, one of the sort of key properties of VR. But we also found lots of things were in common with other digital news storytelling. For example, slightly different reporting styles were required. So here's Alistair Leithhead, who was the BBC's Africa correspondent, and he had to find a more conversational, actually more radio-like reporting style than worked on TV to really make VR work for audiences. And we also focused on sort of what editorial content was going to work to drive forward audiences. There was a tendency, because of the early sense that VR was going to be great for empathy, for people to focus on war and refugee stories, and we made a lot of that in both VR and 360, and some of them have done very well. I noticed there's sort of 5 million views of some of these, but it wasn't going to drive a new audience to VR. So we really focused on stories that were hard-hitting and dealt with serious journalistic issues, but also had some fun experiential things. So in our 3-part news series, Damming the Nile, not only did you find out about the geopolitics of the Egyptian Renaissance dam, but you also went for a nice balloon ride over the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. So we changed the style to make it more enjoyable to watch. Now, we knew when we started the project that VR headset home ownership wasn't going to follow the sort of hype curves that have been presented, but we did want to find a way to get our content to audiences. So we did an unusual partnership for digital content. We partnered with British Libraries to run an amazing trial to take VR out to libraries. And we got some extraordinarily powerful audience research, which certainly confounded my expectations. I'd assumed that some of the entertainment content we made, like Doctor Who, was going to do best. But actually, our 3-part series with Alistair Leithhead exploring the Congo was the thing that people really enjoyed. So the truth is, take great, well-made journalistic stories to people with a VR headset, and people will really enjoy it. So this survey was really unusual for the BBC to get such popular acceptance of what it was doing. You don't normally get that. People love to hate a publicly funded organisation like the BBC. So the agency that did the core survey said they'd never had more positive feedback, and they were taken aback. And I think people got paid a £10 fee for doing the hour-long survey, and several of them asked to donate it to the libraries. They'd had such a positive experience, so it's unheard of. But one of the most extraordinary things for me, one of the things we were testing in terms of our metrics was memorability, because we figured that if VR content, even though it was quite expensive to make and might be shorter than, say, a documentary series or something, but if it stayed in your head longer and made more impact, then it was worth it. And this is a shot that's in Kinshasa Station. It's just one of those VR shots that really work. You feel like you're standing there and people kind of look you in the eye. And people remembered, they said, standing in Kinshasa Station 3.5 months after watching this VR in libraries, which again was unprecedented. You don't remember many news reports and individual shots 3 months after. So extremely promising. However, the BBC decided at that point to focus on current products and services and reduce funding for innovation. So at that point, because obviously there was going to be a while before home headset ownership increased sufficiently to drive forward a service, it was decided that the BBC would pause its VR effort, except on its commercial arm studios. So we had to close the team and pause it. And I want to share with you some of the innovations, and I haven't shared this beyond the BBC. This was part of the report I wrote to senior people at the BBC before I had to close the team and then left. But I think they're really useful things for all these sorts of projects. One is, if you're going to do a sort of future-facing project, insight-led work that brings together the editorial, the product thinking, the distribution, the marketing and comms strategy around that is going to deliver the impact. You've got to join it up and think through it and have that planned. The second thing was around central innovation teams. When you're introducing something new and specialist like that, it does make sense to have a central team that then perhaps share that knowledge across the wider organisation. But big organisations aren't always good at supporting those, and that needs to be better understood in siloed organisations, how you all support that and become part of it. The next big thing was that innovation is going to demand new models for wider industry relations, including partnerships. For example, partnering with libraries and even some of the tech partnerships that were required. It required effort and thinking, and running good partnerships takes time and effort and planning too. And I think that can often be underestimated, just how much time that takes. And then you've got to have lawyers to make these contracts, to take the risks on new things. And that's going to be a big theme, as we'll discuss that in a bit. But as we go forward with different metaverse technologies coming forward, if you haven't got the lawyers that understand how to take the risks, and that's happening big time at the moment over NFTs and crypto, you won't be able to move forward. And everything from HR to business support, it all requires different thinking for innovation teams. And then my last thing, which I didn't put in the BBC report, but I'm going to add to this, is news organisations need to learn how to stop things better, how to make the decisions about stopping things, how to celebrate the success of projects they've decided to discontinue. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a more nuanced way in a minute. So that's for me for now.
Do we want to kind of talk about some of these things
first
before we move on? Yeah. Wait. Go ahead.
Laura, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to kind of second a lot of what Zilla said, because I think a lot of the things that we've learned in the projects that I've worked on really mirror this. And I think one of the biggest things is that second point where centralized innovation teams work but need organizations to support them. Like, my goal with Journalism 360, and every time I've started something new within a news organization, has been for it to eventually never need to exist, because those learnings and those skills would have been absorbed into the rest of the newsroom. And so even, it's kind of true across innovation and other parts of kind of new initiatives as well, where the goal should be for those skills to work across things. And so starting something in a silo and only finding the people who really care about technology for that moment never is going to be sustainable. And so it's really being kind of choosy about those things and then moving them into a way that works across the newsroom. And I think that kind of dovetails to the last point about getting better at stopping things, where it doesn't need to be this siloed off project. You kind of take what you've learned and then apply it to everything else going forward.
Yeah, just to echo what the previous speakers have said in terms of this collaborative, transversal approach that you need to adapt to your company and accept as well as a mandatory basis for innovative project, whether it's like we work with 360 video or VR or AR, or whatever the metaverse is going to be like when it solidifies, which is probably going to be some sort of permanent virtual spaces with embodied personas in them. For instance, on the 360 project that I've managed in terms of transversality, the Uranus building is 6 floors up. Every single floor of the building contributed something. So there was not like a single team of people looking like me, you know, like nerds with glasses in a corner, having fun with cool toys. It was everybody, including people from TV, digital, video editors, graphic designers. The sales team was key as well for some of the commercial opportunities, but I think we'll talk about this more in detail. And in terms of sunsetting the project, I was on the receiving end of a really, well, not harsh, but, you know, sometimes things end and you wish you could do things differently. But I think the approach, certainly for me, but also for the company, can be replicated on some future project.
Yeah, I think with that too, I think it was really difficult. Like a lot of these VR things were, you know, heavily invested in early on, and I think a lot of news organizations really felt like they kind of got burned. Like, why would we continue to invest in technology that feels really difficult to create and expensive, and where is the return on that investment? But like Zilla pointed out in all of these examples, there's something to learn from them and then take to the next technology. And when we talk a little bit about augmented reality, I think that's where, and the metaverse generally, I think that's where we can take some of these early learnings. So not feeling like those investments were, you know, not worthwhile. They certainly were, but yeah.
We touched on this a little bit in terms of defining the metaverse, and I know the title of our talk is Futureproofing Your Newsroom for the Metaverse, but there's been some contention in terms of how are we defining the metaverse. So Laura, I don't know if you want to take a stab at some definition or how you define it for your work, and then jump into some of the augmented reality aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, you know, there's the metaverse as Meta has taken it as a marketing tool, and that's great, and that certainly will be part of the metaverse. But when I think about the metaverse for the work that we do, it's really about how does the Web3 and the internet kind of become part of our lives in a more tangible way. You know, how are we living both in VR and AR and in person? And I gotta say, this is my first conference, and it's really nice to not be virtual. So I think there's a lot of value in all of these different things, but it's how do we, you know, it's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I think it is gonna be defined as we go forward. I don't think anyone has a very, you know, clear-cut sense of what it is yet, and I think that's what's super exciting about it. It really is like the early internet days again, of we're gonna get to define for ourselves which technologies we take with us, you know, on a day-to-day and minute-by-minute basis. So, anybody else want to take it?
Yeah, I think it's a really useful statement to sort of understand a future where we've got various technologies like immersive and AI and 5G and the web converging to create some powerful things that we can't do at the moment. And it is, you know, that analogy with the internet in the 90s is exactly right. None of us knew that we'd be able to watch TV on our phones back then. But the things that we can do will be discovered through experimentation, through trial and error. I still think, given that we can all predict that it could be used for fairly bad things, news organizations should focus on how to use it for good, and make sure there are work streams that focus on that. But it just gives us a sense of a future world in which we can connect with people around the world to work and learn and do things much more easily.
Sure. Should we start talking about AR a little bit? We can do that and then continue. Let's see. So much of my work in the past couple of years has been focused on augmented reality. As I said, we started this program at Yahoo News and Riot, the studio there, called the XR Partner Program. And we really focused on AR for two big reasons. One, and it's one of the reasons I'm still really excited about it, and I think that's accessibility. We worked mostly in web AR, so you did not need to open an additional app or download something new to access it. And you'll see I have a couple examples coming up where you'll be able to just use the QR code like you do at restaurants now to get your menu. You can get an AR experience. So it's really become very accessible and much more cost effective, and being able to trial and error things in augmented reality versus virtual reality is a much quicker, cost effective process. And so we really had to learn about what does narrative look like in AR, and how does newsroom workflow and work streams change when we kind of think about 3D as another tool in our tool set. So one of the biggest things is finding the right partners to work with. First of all, collaboration opportunities inside and outside the newsroom. So who at your organization is excited about building this? Are there people who have experimented working with 3D animation, with Blender, with other tools? You know, people are teaching themselves things outside of work all the time, and this is a great opportunity to kind of find who is working on those things. And then also outside the newsroom, we worked with just across the organization, not just in news, but in entertainment and sports and other places where AR really lends itself to those stories. And then it's a great opportunity to work with artists and animators. We brought in people, I mean, I live in LA, so a lot of people from Hollywood were really excited about what we were doing. We got to work with all kinds of artists on these projects. We even worked, one of the examples I'll show is with an indigenous artist in Australia we worked with for a project, and just really being able to take folks who don't necessarily work in the 3D space, but to give them the opportunity to see their work in 3D. So that's really kind of a fun opportunity. And then partnering with other news organizations. I think one of the things that Tama and I have talked about over the years a lot is this really kind of open ecosystem when it comes to new technology, and an opportunity to find the other people at news organizations in your area who are also interested in experimenting. There's not that sort of closed off approach when it comes to VR and AR, because it's so new. Everybody really wants to learn from each other, and that's really what Journalism 360 was about. And I've seen that ethos kind of continue in a collaborative way. So not being scared to kind of reach out to somebody who in another situation might be your competitor to do something new. One of our biggest learnings was how to talk to your audience about immersive. And I think one of the biggest takeaways is not necessarily having to tell someone that something's in augmented reality. I mean, how many people even know what that really means? It doesn't matter that your audience doesn't need to be able to define what is augmented reality. They just need to know that they're gonna get some cool piece of new content. So we thought really creatively for several projects. We did a piece with BuzzFeed. It was over Halloween, and we created an animated ghost. And you kind of did this little quiz. Of course, it's BuzzFeed. You do a little quiz, and you were able to pull up your ghost in your space. But instead of saying, see your ghost in AR, we said, you know, who's your ghost kind of thing, and find your ghost, and then it was able to just kind of appear. So people thought it was cool, you know. So it didn't matter that we weren't telling them it was AR. They were able to just pull it up and you know, really avoid that technical term. If anything, we were using 3D as a prompt more than AR. And then, you know, tutorials. I think don't be afraid to make a tutorial for your audience. One of the best tutorials I've done is the Oculus little robot that teaches you how to, you know, kind of move around in VR when you first put on the headset. And it's really fun. It's like a little game, and don't be afraid to make those kind of games to introduce your audience to this new kind of content. And then, honestly, it is the least sexy part of this, but it is the most important, and I think kind of the most impactful for newsrooms, and that's about changing newsroom workflow. It's really thinking about your graphics editors as how do you empower them to be 3D editors? How do you take somebody who has made really great graphics, really intricate, you know, data visualizations, and teach them how to think about 3D and how can you incorporate those in new ways? And I think that's really where we made the most impact at Yahoo. We really trained up a lot of people to just understand the basics of some of the free tools, things like Sketchfab that are out there on the web. You can download, you know, 3D objects and just put them into your stories. And that's been a really big change. So when, you know, NASA sends a satellite up and a 3D image of that satellite is available for free and, you know, copyright free online, you can take that and put it into your story really easily and give, you know, your readers a really different experience. And then how to pitch immersive up the chain. It only works if you have buy-in all the way up. You can only do so much when it's just your little group who wants to see the change happen. So it's about promoting it and really talking about it as a way really to future-proof. I mean, I think, you know, we kind of make fun of ourselves with the title of this panel a little bit, but I think it's really important that we don't get caught behind. And so that's why this stuff, even if you're not seeing the impact immediately, it's about preparing for you know, the next steps. I think we've all seen newsrooms get caught behind with social media and even the internet in the early days, you know, and we have an opportunity to really get ahead of things by learning now. So these are a couple of projects that I worked on in the past couple of years, and you can actually scan that QR code. It should come up. This is a piece we did with the LA Times right after the protests around George Floyd's murder, summer of 2020. There were many murals that went up all around Los Angeles commemorating Black Lives Matter, and this was one of them, but we used drone technology to capture 4 or 5 of those murals, and then we were able to shrink them down enough to get them into AR and kind of capture them. And we worked with a reporter at the LA Times who'd been following several of these artists over the year. And it was really great because a lot of these, you know, 2 years on, a lot of them have been painted over, a lot of them have different posters that have been put up over them, but you can still experience them in AR. So I really think it's a great use of the technology. And then this is the one that I mentioned. Oh, that's a YouTube video that did not translate into the PowerPoint, sorry. But you can pull it up on there. This is, we worked with this artist in Australia, and she does a lot of work around this whale. His name is Migaloo, and he's a white albino humpback whale who swims up and down the coast of Australia. He's very special. And she's done a lot of art around him, and we took her line drawings and made them into 3D. So now you can see Migaloo's kind of journey and put him anywhere. He could be, you know, looking across the hillside here if you wanted to check him out. So you can use that QR code to pull him up. Oh, there he is. Hey, what do you know? And then I will hand it over to Thomas. Yeah. Oh. Can I angle the screen? Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about future-proofing and looking past at our experience, common experience here on the stage, I think the element that made the most impact for all of us was the creation, the coalescence, and the nurturing of an ecosystem where we, as news organization, freelancer, tech people, developer, artists, graphic designers, all work together almost as if there was no competition. I'm not gonna lie, you know, there was, we worked with some of our competitors at Euronews, and that wasn't always easy, but I think there was this mental openness of saying, look, we've done this. This is an experiment. This is how we did it. This is what we've learned. Here's our learnings, right? Here's our findings. Try it for yourself. And we've done it at Euronews a couple of times, whether it was on LinkedIn posts, Medium posts. I've spoken at numerous conferences, including here 5 years ago, talking about my work very openly, including all the challenges. There was no like trade secret in a way. Right now, today on the technologies around AR and photogrammetry, while Journalism 360 has published a series of guides that you can find easily for free online, and it's, you know, like the best of the best, telling you how they do things. So you can learn immediately, and it really dramatically lowers the entry costs, right? And also the New York Times R&D lab, even though the New York Times, you know, they have all this money, all those resources, all those brain powers, they still are very much open in terms of what they found and how you can use the tool they've developed or that they found out to do those immersive or AR experience. Something I would like to emphasize as well, because in Europe we have it's a chance really to have an active public service media landscape, and I think they have a role to play as well as early adopters are tax funded, R&D lab in some of them, most of them actually, and through the EBU as well, to look at the metaverse, identify, tools, identify ways that it's useful, not only just look at best practices or case studies and tell us, oh, this works, that's cool. No, just tell us how to do it, and how to do it on the cheap, right? Because they are big compared to the media organization in their countries most often, but how do they can spread this knowledge? And one example of this is Cathy Bremer's report on the metaverse. She published it, it's in French. I don't think there's a translation available in English, but it's 130 page. It's a very long, very thorough work. Look at the metaverse. I encourage you to maybe run it through DeepL, get a good translation out of it. It's an impressive piece of work, and for me, it's typically a good example of what public service media in Europe should do around this topic. And obviously, and I know there's some people from Meta and probably Google in the room, but also I hope from the EU. Early adopters, or people who want to do new things, need money to get the buy-in internally, to maybe get trainings on some of the skills that's needed to future-proof their workforce. And we were lucky at Euronews to get some funding from the Google News Initiative back in 2015, 2016, really helped kickstart our experience. But I would encourage funders, whether they're public institution. I know the EU has issued a call that closed a few months ago on VR and XR in Europe, and it was, I think, 22 million euros, which is great. I do hope they continue investing in the space, because organizations, especially news organizations, are risk averse. And when you come in with €500,000 in a news organization, well, that tends to add the cog of the decision-making process, and it makes it easier to change things up, right? To shake up the status quo a little bit. Related to investment and money, clearly, I'm not serving you 101 MBA, it's like bullshit, but it's about strengths and weaknesses. Of course, for instance, let me tell you and show you instead of telling you. At Euronews, when we started working with 360 video, for us it was video first and foremost. So we knew how to do video, right? We had dozens of video editors. Learning to do 360 video was slightly different, but it was still the same level, base level of skills, right? So that was a strength we had. One of the weaknesses was the software. The software, when we started back in 2015, there was no single software to stitch, like to assemble those 360 video. You had to go through one or two external software before being able to put it directly in Premiere. It was a whole mess. And the Premiere back then couldn't handle 4K. It was a whole thing. In terms of opportunity as well, call for projects, call for tenders, commercial opportunities, storytelling opportunities. Keep your eyes open for this. A lot of the recent AR or VR projects are around almost like enterprise projects, the Olympics, the moon landing anniversary, that sort of thing. That's sort of big scheduled events that it's going to come in 6 months, in a year. You can try to do something around it without it becoming so much of a flagship project, but like a good experimenting opportunity. And in terms of threats, do you feel like you're going to be left aside, or do you feel like it works with the strategy? When we started experimenting with 360 video, it was also because we had recently changed stakeholder, and a new majority shareholder, had renewed digital interest. So it made sense then to pitch something that was very innovative and very digital. So just something for you to keep in mind if you want to pitch or think about VR project or metaverse project. A few of my recommendations, of course, before we move to I guess an open discussion. It's okay to take baby steps. And if you're a managing role, it's okay to make space for your team to learn and fail. It's actually necessary, and it has to be budgeted in any way, shape, or form. Time, resources, of course, money. We messed up a couple shoots with our 360 video camera. That we made mistakes that you have to do once, and then you never make them again. That's if you're gonna work on the metaverse or on virtual environment, you're gonna mess up things. That's okay. The first people to do photojournalism, the first people that went and done documentary, messed up things. That's all right. And in terms of baby steps, we basically went to 3 different steps. The first step was, how can you do a technically sound news product? That was the first step. Okay, does this work? Can people consume it? The second step is this journalism? Okay, do you answer the 5 W's and maybe the why and the how? And the third step, I'm not going to do this, but yeah, the third step was, is this engaging? Can you keep your audience engaged in your experience when, you know, it's difficult and it's not usual for people, and especially in some of the behaviors, consumer behaviors with digital technology. It's not very social, you can't share it to your friends, it's isolating a little bit. And that ties into my next point, which is define early what your objectives should be and your successes should be. And in terms of engagement, try to define and build in your processes what a successful experience is going to look like. This is part of my work that I've done as an RGI fellow in the US, was to look at, okay, tell me, I interviewed, I think, 40 content creators. Tell me how you know a video is good. And nobody had the same answers. And a lot of people were like, well, I don't really know. I need a tool, or I would like a tool to be able to test, you know, does this work? Is this engaging? Do I transmit the information that I think I'm transmitting with those experience? But in general, and for all project management, setting clear objectives and metrics to measure it by is important. One last point I think I'd make, I think it's my last point, is about your staff. When I was tasked to run the 360 project at Euronews, it was just because I had badgered my boss every day for 6 months, be like, can we do something in 360? Can we do something in 360? Can we? And eventually we got the money, and all of a sudden, well, I was the project manager. I had no idea how to do project management. I was a VR editor, the first in Europe, I guess, and there was no resources, no example to follow, but I had the support of my boss, of my colleagues, to do something. And I'm saying to you, if you're a manager now, or if you actually have a great idea to do something very innovative, look at your support network, try to build your support network, try to find your mentors or your support. And if you're in a managing role, try to identify and trust your team. I know it's difficult when you're resource constrained, especially right now. And I think it's also an opportunity, and I guess it's kind of weird that it's me saying this, to give a chance to empower other voices on telling the news, that it's not just the people who always told the news. Maybe give a voice to someone else. And on that note, I'm going to pass the mic.
Shall I explain this picture, or should we talk? We were moving on to just talk about a few of the unintended consequences of the innovation work. We've lost the slides now altogether. Whoa. Oh, it's me here?
There we go.
Okay. And the two things, before we get to what this slide is about, two things I think the way we work in the newsroom, virtual collaboration and other tools, I mean, that's all seen as part of the metaverse. That's happening already, and there's lots of things you can experiment there, even if you're not already doing so. In fact, there's a great BBC click on sort of alternatives to Zoom that are very much metaverse thing that you can have a go at. And the second thing, again, which hadn't really, we sort of played around with at the BBC when we were making Damming the Nile. The BBC had what was called a virtual reality studio, a green screen studio where you could ultimately put the presenter in front of a big scene. And we built in Unity this enormous Renaissance dam and various graphics to show the impact on the Nile of when it was filled, what we found was that the graphics were just too impossible to process on the ancient system that was running the virtual newsroom. But that has changed now. So this is the BBC Sport studio for the Tokyo Olympics with a changing skyline. Very, very cool. And now let's have a look at where they really are. They didn't get to go to Tokyo. They're in Manchester, in Salford, in this little green screen room. But again, this is going to transform how broadcast news is done, and the amazing sets and ways we can use graphics to explain news with presenters inside. And I think many broadcast news organisations in the next few years are going to be making a decision about whether they switch graphics over to being created within in-game engines. And that will be a major change again in terms of workflows, but also be an enabler for all sorts of cool experiences, whether that's assets for websites or whether that's for news studios.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was one thing that we learned in the pandemic, it was, we had these beautiful studios and we couldn't go into them, we couldn't use them. And, so much was done virtually, both from a broadcast news side, but also even like we were doing motion capture with, our developers were just like at their houses and figuring out how to do that, walking through their living room, and they were able to create some really incredible work. And I think that's, just the beginning of this. I think it's really moved the needle on that. So if there's one silver lining, I think it's figuring that out. And, it's interesting seeing the Olympic stuff, because I worked on the Rio Olympics at NBC in 2016, and even then, so much of the games were called from the studio in Stamford, Connecticut, with just a much smaller staff being actually in Rio. And so now you've just seen that kind of tenfold, over the last couple of years. So definitely that those investments are paying off.
So a reminder, if you do have specific questions, if you want to use the hashtag futureproofing, then I can see what your actual questions are. But otherwise, I have a list of questions, so we'll go through a few in the next few minutes. One of the questions we were discussing before was about how and when to train staff to approach new formats like 3D content and AR. But I also will make it sort of a two-part thing in terms of, so there's the how and when question, but then, and we've sort of talked about why, but like what affordances, and this is a very clear example, but what affordances or what rationale, reason do we really think that it makes sense to train people for? Like, because I think a lot of criticism would be like, okay, but do you really need it? Why? What are we adding? Especially when you have like Mark Zuckerberg, who's like, I'm gonna show you my home. Like, do we need to see that? I don't know, maybe not. So why, like the why aspect, but then how do we decide to train?
Yeah, one of my least favorite questions that I would get asked when pitching something is, why is this in AR? And I actually think the way Tama described going through how is something journalistic and how is it engaging is a much better question to ask, because that's what pushes the needle forward, right? That's what kind of tells us, we didn't used to ask, well, why would you make a video of this instead of writing a story? It just sort of progressed over time where people were watching more videos instead of reading, and, and now it's like everything's closed caption because you don't have your audio on your phone. It's like things just sort of build on each other, and I really believe that that will happen with these formats as well. We're just not quite there yet. So I think there are certainly things that lend themselves more or less to this, and definitely things I've looked at and said, we have certainly failed on some experiments with this. Capturing people in 3D and trying to have a conversation is not quite there yet, and I do kind of struggle with when is that something that's worthwhile. But generally, trying to capture a place or an object to see it up close, I don't like answering the why is it in AR, why would you have a photograph of this instead of a 3D version of it, because I think we only learn by doing, so.
I think I'd always go back to audiences for the why, or that it's going to change the way people work. And with the two of those, they could both provide strong solutions. So if you think that this might lead to a way to really engage audiences deeply with the story and help them understand it and engage with it, that's a good reason. And two, if it changed the way you work, and again, the creativity within your organization or save costs, that's another good reason too. So both of those things would be good justifications.
And in terms of sending a reporter in a virtual environment, if we really want to go to the end point of what the metaverse reporting can be actually today, well, you have, political meetings in versions of the metaverse. You have concerts, you have events, and it would be legitimate to cover what those politicians, what those artists do and say in this virtual environment, the same way 10 years ago it was kind of new to report on what people were saying on social media, like politicians were saying on social media, how they were using Facebook for their strategy. And in the same way now that you see a lot of, an increasing number of people focused on internet culture, right? But it can be now TikTok, and what are those kids doing in those houses? How much money do they bring? Mm-hmm. And it's because there's a business behind, there are companies and millions of people being involved, and they're not necessarily on the radar of most people above 25, I would say. And I'm not just saying this is like a young, like a kid stuff, right? But if you're covering the news, if your job as a journalist is to find, gather, verify, and structure and distribute information, well, I think it's relevant to be present on those virtual worlds, and you wouldn't be even the first one. There were journalists in Second Life 15 years ago. There was newspapers published there, so it's actually not as new as we would think.
Do you think a headline that says, "That wasn't me, that was my avatar," after some terrible gaffe is probable fairly soon then? The AI took over for that bit.
It's almost like thinking about reporting on those other platforms, like you think about, reporting, having a correspondent in another country. It's just, that's the kind of the next thing. But yeah, or the current thing. Yeah.
One of the other questions we were talking about, and many of you touched upon this, is in terms of how do you create paths towards financial sustainability, or what kind of aspects do you imagine? And I think that within the context of VR and 360 video, there was some funding going into certain projects, some accessibility to certain people, but in terms of thinking about funding and sustainability, like how are you imagining potential futures, if you will?
So beyond grant funding, one of the ways that Your News made money out of 360 project was to add a 360 element to sponsored content, which Your News has done in the past and continues doing. So it's adding something to a catalog, right? So if you master creating virtual environment in your newsroom, or that can be something that you add to the commercial side of things, right? I don't want to say NFT or anything like that. There is one thing, if given the investment of gaming companies, Roblox and Epic and Unreal in the space, I think microtransaction might be a natural form of financial transaction in the metaverse, or in metaverses plural. And I think news organizations should keep an eye on this. I know it's really hard online to have people pay for one article, for one video. There's always projects, they always fail. But once it's built in the system and you're talking to an audience that's very much used to do microtransaction for skins, if you're playing Fortnite or whatever, maybe this is more promising than implementing a new system in an ecosystem where the habit is not there.
I was going to say, we are presented with all the same challenges that digital news on the internet or on social has in terms of business models with this. It's a challenge, and you're also potentially working through another platform to share your content with audiences, and the issues that raises too.
Yeah, I think there are some positive opportunities, though. I think, particularly with AR, most people are used to using or seeing AR in an advertising sense. I think, IKEA was one of the first to launch, be able to see, the couch in your space. And a lot of the things that we were producing at Yahoo, we had advertising relationships with, Pottery Barn and Amazon and some of these companies that are already using AR in that way. And so the audience wasn't necessarily surprised to then see an AR 3D element to bring into your space within the news context, since they were introduced to it already, whether it was on a sponsored page or alongside it, or just kind of keeping within that. And the platform that we had built was also originally built to serve those advertisers. So it was really, how can we use this technology and learn from this technology that was built for ads to then create editorial immersive content separate from that. So I think there, it's definitely a baby steps learning process, but I think there is a lot of opportunity there as well. So.
We have one question that came on Twitter. So how do you sell your ideas to your organization despite the risk of low return on investment, like expensive technology and small user base? Does anybody want to take that? Yeah.
I'll give you my story. In addition to being very insistent to my boss, I try to move from like the operational to a tactical and strategic mindset, so that my boss and my boss's boss and all the way to the CEO would buy in the idea. And coming back to the opportunities and threats, etc., it was a time where there was a lot of early adopters, but our News being a multilingual company, we could produce this type of content in language where there was none. So we would not only be early adopter, we would be first mover. And you start thinking like that, you start convincing people who also think like that. We managed to find a partnership with Samsung very early on in our project as well, because we were first movers. So obviously money helps to sell your idea. So doesn't have to be dirty necessarily. Right? But think about how your idea serves the goals of the company, not just journalistic, and of course you should focus on the journalism because that's your job, but it's okay to think about, hey, would we have clients which could be interested in this? Do we have existing partnerships with companies, with the startups, etc., that could serve the company? Your project cannot exist just as an editorial project. If you want to get investment and get buy-in, it needs to really fit in the overall picture of the company.
Yeah. And I think exactly that, and I think we're also, two mics. I think we're also at a place where the investment doesn't have to be that high to at least prototype some of these things. So if you're interested, you have an idea, being able to do it at a small scale and show that to your bosses, show that, up the chain, and then get other people excited about it so you don't feel like you're so alone. Find the other people who are interested in that story and then show them the opportunities that will work with that technology. So, I think, yes, pitching a big narrative VR project that you're like, this is going to be a 10-minute VR project only, in headset that's going to go to Sundance without anybody, kind of knowing what it takes or having that buy-in at the newsroom is going to be a really hard way to start out. But if you think about, I want to pull a very small 3D object and integrate it into a story and figure out a narrative around that, and then think about how that would lead to something bigger, just building up that way. I think, the technology has improved and gotten so much cheaper and more accessible in the last 3 years that, it's not easy, still not easy, but it's there for you.
My tip is to keep it as a part of another project as well within a news organisation. So with the films we made about the Nile and the Congo, the team making those also, we had a specialist VR cameraman producer on the team, but they were also creating output for both the BBC website, for TV and radio news. So it was cost effective and we couldn't have afforded to do it otherwise. So that's another way to do it and save costs. And I found journalists incredibly enthusiastic enthusiastic, especially foreign correspondents, because it was about telling stories and taking people to see the place and understand it. So again, the enthusiasm of the journalists working on the project will also help sell it.
Cool. We have a few minutes left. I don't know, we'll have...
Should we do that slide of our... Should we move on to that, and then we can talk about that final slide? We've got a few tips here of metaverse preparedness. Oh, here we go. Key strategies for the metaverse. Here you go, write this down. The first one is stay up to date and learn from others. This is something that's going to change. Business models are going to change. Audience habits are going to change. It will be over time, but you might get caught out by something. This is not something you can leave to a sort of digital team to work out. You should be staying across it. Keep across what the New York Times are doing in particular, because they're always pushing ahead and trying to understand things, but also look beyond what news organizations and broadcasters are doing. Go to museums where they've got immersive experiences. Go to, I mean, there are some amazing things you can see. I was at a Paris ball where I had to dance recently in a most amazing, fully immersive VR thing called Le Bal de Paris. Go and see what's possible. And the second thing is experiment to understand. Do small experiments so you really get it. There's only so much you can learn without doing those sorts of things. And build partnerships. So you focused in hugely on partnerships. So why don't you take that one on?
Sure, yeah. So much like finding the right person in your news organization who wants to work on these things, it's finding those people at other news organizations who want to work on these things. But like Zilla was saying with the BBC, like finding those projects that really lend themselves to the storytelling and offering up what you have as an organization or an individual to lend to those stories. So you know, Yahoo is an aggregator, so when I was building these partnerships, some of the organizations we worked with already had relationships and others didn't. I mean, we brought in the LA Times specifically to do immersive storytelling, and then that grew into their actual news distribution opportunity with Yahoo. So I think there's, you know, how do you find those avenues? You want to do a project with a news organization, but what else can you offer them, you know, across the board? And so how does that work? And then you make a stronger pitch when you come in, you know, for grant funding or anything else when you're working with another organization. So, you know, applying together to some of the resources that are out there, and then being able to share across also builds your audience, you know, double the amount of, you know, traffic and opportunities to share those stories. So, yeah.
And then the last one about brands. Launching a VR project isn't that different from launching a podcast. People have got to know about it. It's got to have a great title. You've got to have a strategy for pushing it. So again, having brands that people recognize, especially ultimately if people are going to be able to be finding it on an online store and they need to know and remember exactly what to search for. That's critically important. And having your data in order, I mean, again, that's a sort of future-proofing thing that everyone should be doing. And the better better ordered your data is, the more things you'll be able to do with it in the metaverse or wherever else we go.
For the last question, is there one thing you want people to take away in terms of preparing for the metaverse or making sure that newsrooms are future-proofed for the metaverse? Maybe just like one takeaway each in the few minutes we have.
I know the pandemic has been difficult for a lot of people. We're tired, we're burnt out. I would recommend you stay connected to what's going on in the industry, especially in terms of some of the cutting edge aspect of the technology. Maybe speak to someone who's, you know, spends a lot of time on Minecraft to understand the appeal. Check the latest concert in VR or on the metaverse, because this is the only way you can see like the trends, the undercurrents that are the things to come, right? But in general, I would say, yeah, keep an eye out so that in 5 years, when I'm here, I'm actually in the audience and one of you is actually on stage and telling us how they did something cool in the metaverse.
Yeah, I think it's just not being afraid to experiment and throw things out there. We produced dozens of pieces, I would say, a small percentage of them were really successful, and I think it's just about experimentation and not being afraid to put things out there and trying these different platforms. I think particularly with Snapchat, Instagram, don't be afraid to put things out on a platform that isn't your own, just to see what works and then figure out how to incorporate it. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
I'm going to say two key things: curiosity and collaboration with people you might not have collaborated with before, but also collaboration across news organizations to make sure opportunities aren't missed.
I think we have one last slide which has contact information, and an inspirational quote. Do you want to read it out?
That's not.
I'm not going to read this quote out. It's just to go meta on the metaverse. If the space you're reporting from has a recording and playback ability, do you really need to be there? Just some food for thought.
I like it. This is just to start you off on what we've been saying of keeping up with what's out there. There's a lot of stories out there right now and predictions, all of which should be taken with a large grain of salt, but really good to read everything that's available. And I'll practice my French and read that report tomorrow. So that's available. And then just our contact information, so feel free to keep in touch with us.
Great. Thank you so much for coming.
Hello. How are you? How was your safari? Oh, I don't know. How many? 3. Oh my God. Crazy. How's it going? Are you, when did you get back? And did you come straight? Oh.